They told Keanu Reeves his sister had only 3 weeks to live, and Hollywood waited for his meltdown. But instead, he vanished, built something behind hospital walls, and rewrote the ending no doctor believed was possible. What did he give up, and what miracle did he create in return? The truth will leave you breathless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The wind was biting as Keanu Reeves walked slowly around the edge of the hospital parking lot, hands deep in the pockets of his worn leather jacket. His boots crunched against the gravel, but his mind barely registered the sound. All he could hear was the echo of the doctor's words, replaying again and again in his head. Your sister has acute leukemia, aggressive. She may have weeks, maybe. That word, maybe, wasn't a comfort. It was a sentence, a cruel one. He paused under a flickering streetlight, the hospital's glow casting a sterile blue hue on the pavement behind him. He looked up at the night sky, but there were no stars in Los Angeles that night, just a heavy ceiling of smog and sorrow. His fingers trembled, not from the cold, but from the shock. Inside, just a few rooms away, Kim Reeves lay curled up under a thin hospital blanket, her smile as fragile as the IV tube surrounding her. She had always been the strong one growing up, funny, brave, the kind of person who lit up a room just by entering. But now, her skin was pale, her body shrinking before his eyes. Earlier, when the doctor delivered the news, the room fell into stunned silence. Keanu's breath caught in his throat, and for a long moment he couldn't speak, couldn't even move. Their mother, Patricia, was there too, her hand clutching her purse, knuckles white. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't make a sound. It was Kim who broke the silence. Her voice was soft, almost too gentle for the weight of her words. Hey, don't look like that. I'm still here, aren't I? Keanu turned his head, blinking hard, trying to stay composed, but his eyes betrayed him. I'm not going anywhere without a fight, she added. Then, trying to lighten the moment, she quipped, Besides, I haven't finished teasing you about your haircut. Keanu cracked the smallest of smiles. It was a classic Kim move, deflecting pain with humor. But behind her brave face, he saw it. The fear. The trembling lip when the nurse turned away, the quick wince when the IV was adjusted, the unspoken question in her eyes. What happens to me now? That night, Keanu sat beside her bed long after visiting hours ended. The nurses didn't ask him to leave. They'd seen that kind of devotion before, but rarely with such quiet intensity. He held her hand in both of his. It felt too light, too cold. She drifted off into a medicated sleep, and Keanu leaned forward, resting his forehead gently against the back of her hand. I'm not letting this take you, he whispered, so quietly it was almost lost in the hum of machines. We fight. Together. No one else heard him, but in that moment, something in him shifted. It wasn't just about hope anymore. It was about resolve. He didn't know how they would do it. He didn't know where it would lead. But he knew one thing, Kim wouldn't face this alone. The next morning, Keanu was still there when Kim stirred awake. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing tired eyes, but a faint smile beneath them. You look like you slept in a parking lot, she mumbled. He gave a tired laugh. Close enough. She reached for his hand again, this time gripping a little tighter. You don't have to stay every second. I know, he said, but I'm not going anywhere. Throughout the day, the weight of the prognosis began to settle on the family. Doctors explained treatment options: aggressive chemotherapy, blood transfusions, maybe a bone marrow transplant if a match could be found. The odds weren't in their favor. The disease had advanced fast. Too fast. Insurance would cover part of it, but not all. The best care meant private specialists, experimental treatments, home modifications. It meant money Keanu didn't have. Not yet. He was just beginning to land meaningful roles in Hollywood, but the steady checks hadn't started rolling in. Fame hadn't arrived, only hard auditions, side jobs, and rejections. But none of that mattered now. The only role he cared about was being a brother. By the third day, he was already compiling notes. Treatments, hospitals, nutrition plans, anything, everything. He scribbled in a worn notebook while Kim slept, occasionally glancing up to check on her breathing. She looked so peaceful, but he knew that peace was temporary. The doctors still gave her weeks. That word haunted him. Weeks, not months, not years. He stepped out onto the hospital balcony, gripping the rusted railing tightly. His knuckles turned white. He stared out at the skyline and tried to slow his thoughts. A nurse approached him. Evelyn, kind eyes behind thick glasses. She'd been watching quietly from afar. "She's lucky to have you," she said. Keanu didn't respond right away. Then, softly, "I think I'm the lucky one." Evelyn smiled. "Still, many don't have someone like you." He looked down at his hands. "It's not enough." "It is," she said. "It's more than enough." That night, Keanu returned to Kim's bedside, this time bringing a small cassette player. He placed it gently on the table beside her bed. "What's that?" she asked sleepily. "Us," he said. "Every road trip, every dumb mixtape you made me listen to in the 80s. She chuckled. "Even the one with Bon Jovi and Prince on the same side?" "Especially that one." The music played quietly through the night, filling the sterile room with something warmer. Memories. Home. Heart. Keanu sat there, watching her breathe, letting the music remind them both that life had been full of moments before this diagnosis, and it still could be. As midnight passed, he made a quiet vow to himself. Whatever it took, however long it took, she would live, and he would be the reason why. The sky outside was pale and indifferent, the kind of morning that couldn't decide whether to be cloudy or bright. Keanu stood at the threshold of a soundstage in downtown Los Angeles, holding a shooting script that suddenly felt like a foreign object in his hands. Inside, producers waited, cameras were set, and lights had been tested for hours. But Keanu's mind wasn't in the studio. It was in a hospital room across town, where Kim lay sleeping under a tangle of IV lines and quiet machines. The doctor's voice still echoed in his skull like an unresolved chord. "It's aggressive. She has weeks, maybe less." He looked down at the contract folder his agent had just handed him. Starring role in a major franchise reboot, 7 figures, global release, career-defining. But his hand didn't move. Not to sign. Not to flip a page. Not even to breathe. Instead, Keanu quietly handed the folder back. His agent, Melissa, blinked. "Keanu, this role is yours. If you walk away now..." "I already have," he interrupted gently. She looked at him like he'd lost something, but Keanu wasn't thinking about what he was losing. He was thinking about what he refused to risk. "She's my only role right now." Melissa's voice cracked. "You can't save her by sitting next to her bed. I'm not trying to save her with presents. I'm trying to show her she doesn't have to face this alone." Later that day, without a press release or headline, Keanu Reeves quietly vanished from Hollywood. No tweets, no statement. Just silence and a hospital room. He moved in that evening, bringing only a duffel bag with black t-shirts, old flannels, and 3 books Kim had once said she wanted to read. Someday when I have time. Now, time was an enemy. Kim woke up groggy from medication and found him in the chair next to her, already asleep, arms folded across his chest. "You're supposed to be in Paris," she whispered. He cracked an eye open and smiled. "Paris can wait. You can't." The basson. By morning, hospital staff were stunned to find Keanu helping fold bed linens, passing out coffee to the night nurses, and brushing Kim's hair with the same concentration he once gave to movie stunts. He asked about her white blood cell count, memorized the names of every medication, and kept a small notebook to jot down even the smallest detail about her condition. He wasn't just present, he was all in. In the days that followed, the tabloids buzzed with speculation. Where's Keanu Reeves? Is he walking away from Hollywood for good? Did he have a breakdown? The truth was quieter, simpler, and deeper than anyone imagined. He made Kim his entire world. She tried to laugh through the pain, sometimes teasing, "You're going to miss your big break because of me." And he always answered the same way, "You are my big break." Executives from the studio tried to reach him. One even showed up at the hospital, armed with contracts and charm, trying to lure him back. But Keanu never left the room. He never even opened the door. Each night, after the nurses dimmed the lights, he would unfold the cot beside Kim's bed, lay down beside her, and listen to the beeping rhythm of machines like they were lullabies. He knew every creak in the floor, every shift in her breathing. When she winced in her sleep, he was there with a cool cloth. When her nausea hit, he was already holding the basin. When she wept, he didn't speak. He just held her hand until the shaking stopped. He became her shadow, her stillness, her shield. On the fifth night, she reached over weakly and touched his face. "You could have been anywhere," she whispered. "I am," he said softly. "Right here." And somehow, in the thick fog of chemotherapy and exhaustion, that became their anchor. The weeks blurred. Keanu stopped counting days. He didn't care what projects he lost or what headlines circulated. His only measure of time became Kim's color returning, her voice growing stronger, or the rare moment when she smiled without wincing. One evening, a nurse named Evelyn pulled him aside. "You know, most family members come for a few hours, maybe sleep here once or twice, but you're here every second." He gave a tired smile. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." "You remind me of a story," she said. "A father who planted one tree for every day his daughter stayed in treatment. Everyone thought he was crazy, but now there's a whole forest where despair used to be." Keanu didn't respond right away, but that night in his journal, he drew a tree and wrote the date beneath it. He would do that every night from then on. 37 trees later, Kim had a stable scan. The doctors called it a positive sign. Keanu called it a beginning. The world still didn't know where he had gone. But in a quiet hospital room filled with tubes, machines, and a brave sister hanging on, Keanu Reeves was exactly where he needed to be. The hallway lights buzzed faintly as Keanu stepped into room 27 for the 100th time, but this time it felt heavier. The sterile air, the pale sheets, the quiet beeping of machines. It all pressed down on him with unbearable weight. Kim lay curled on her side, her skin translucent, her breath shallow. Her once lively eyes were duller now, but they still lit up just slightly when they saw him. He offered her a soft smile, though it took everything not to let his lips tremble. Keanu didn't check into a hotel. He didn't leave after visiting hours. He pulled the clunky vinyl recliner close to her bed and unfolded it as far as it would go. A nurse brought him an extra pillow. He waved her off with a grateful nod. "I'm fine, here." The next few days became a rhythm of quiet devotion. He would wake when Kim stirred, help her sit up, gently reposition the oxygen tube, or just hold her hand until her fingers stopped shaking. She couldn't keep food down. Her hair, once long and dark, came out in clumps on the pillow. When the nurse offered to shave it for her, Kim hesitated, but Keanu just looked at her and said, "If it's going, we do it together." That night, in the tiny hospital bathroom, he ran the clipper through his own thick black hair first, then carefully helped her shave hers. They laughed through tears. It wasn't about the hair. It was about courage. At 2 a.m., when sleep evaded both of them, Keanu would pull out his small moleskin notebook. He'd read her lines of poetry, journal entries, quotes he'd collected over the years. "Hope," he whispered once, reading from a page he scribbled hours earlier, "is not a promise that everything will be okay. It's the decision to show up anyway." Kim smiled faintly and whispered back, "Then your hope in a hoodie." She drifted to sleep holding that notebook in her lap. Keanu started bringing small comforts from home. A wool blanket from their childhood couch, the lavender-scented lotion their mother once used, a framed photo of the two of them on their first trip to the beach. He wasn't trying to recreate the past, he was anchoring her to it, to every memory they still had left, to every reason she needed to stay. He read to her, not just poetry, but old letters they'd exchanged as kids, letters from when he left home for work, scrawled with misspellings and inside jokes. Kim would smile faintly through her fatigue. It was barely a flicker, but it was there, and that flicker kept Keanu going. One afternoon, he slipped a small notebook into her lap. "What's this?" she whispered. "A log," he said, "not of symptoms, of dreams." She opened it to the first page. His handwriting filled the top. "Dream 1. You're riding a motorcycle beside me, wind in your face. You're cancer-free. We don't stop." Tears pooled in her eyes, but she smiled. He made it a ritual. Each day he'd add a dream. Some were grand, world tours, mountain summits. Others were quiet, watching the sun rise, baking cookies like they used to on rainy Saturdays. Slowly, Kim began writing her own beneath his. Her hands trembled, but the pen held steady. Hope, even scribbled, was still hope. When the nurses changed her IV or monitored her vitals, Keanu was there, asking questions, learning, studying. He wasn't just her brother. He was becoming her advocate. If a nurse missed something or a medication was late, he noticed. If Kim winced even slightly, he asked what she needed before she spoke. He never raised his voice. But the weight of his presence was impossible to ignore. Doctors began adjusting their tone when speaking to her. They explained things more carefully, offered options instead of ultimatums. Because Keanu was watching, and they could tell, he wasn't a celebrity here. He was a guardian. Still, Kim's body was fragile. The chemo had ravaged her immune system. Her gums bled. She developed mouth sores. Even sitting up became exhausting. And one night, she spiked a fever that wouldn't break. Keanu sat frozen as they rushed her into emergency isolation. Gowned-up nurses worked around the clock. He couldn't go in. He stood at the window, hand pressed to the glass, as machines beeped and her chest rose and fell. "I should have caught it sooner," he whispered. But blaming himself wouldn't help her, he knew that, and yet he felt powerless. For the first time in weeks, the hospital walls felt too cold, too thin, too final. He stayed there all night, eyes open, mind racing. The next morning, a nurse slipped him a tray. Toast, coffee, apple slices. "Eat," she said softly. "You can't pour from an empty cup." He nodded but barely touched the food. His hunger was gone. All he wanted was her to open her eyes again. When she finally did, 2 days later, it was like watching the sunrise crack through a thunderstorm. "You look awful," she rasped. Keanu laughed, choked with emotion. "Takes one to know one." That moment was a turning point. Not in her condition, her vitals were still weak, her treatment plan still uncertain, but in spirit. Her sarcasm meant she still had fight in her. And for Keanu, that was everything. He knelt by her bed, took her frail hand, and placed something soft inside it. It was the dream log. She opened it slowly, her fingers grazing the last dream he had written. Dream 28. You open your eyes and tell me I look terrible. I laugh. It means you're still here. Her lips quivered as she read it. Well, you were right. Keanu exhaled with a trembling smile. You keep proving me right, Kim. The staff began to notice how much Kim stabilized when Keanu was near. Her vitals were stronger, her mood brighter. One nurse said quietly, I think she's holding on for him. Another added, he's holding her together by sheer will. At night, he wrote her more letters, this time placing them in a small wooden box by her bedside, each sealed with a date. Some were funny, others raw and aching, but all of them carried the same message beneath every word. you're not alone. And in those quiet, uncertain nights, with machines humming and moonlight spilling through blinds, Keanu Reeves, the world-famous actor, was just a brother, a quiet guardian, a steady hand in the storm. When Kim drifted to sleep, he'd sit in the recliner, notebook on his lap, adding another dream to the log. Dream 36. You're dancing barefoot in the rain. And I don't stop you, I just watch. Because if life was slipping through their fingers, he was going to catch every drop. The room felt colder that day, not because the thermostat was off, but because of the weight in the air, the heaviness of a conversation that no one wanted to start. Kim was asleep, her face pale and fragile under the hospital's fluorescent lights, when two doctors stepped into the hallway and gently asked Keanu to join them outside. He followed without a word, his movements quiet and deliberate, like someone walking a tightrope. In the hallway, one doctor cleared her throat. "Mr. Reeves, we've exhausted the recommended protocols. Her body isn't responding anymore. Her immune system is collapsing under the stress of repeated chemotherapy. At this point, we suggest transitioning to palliative care. Our focus would shift from treatment to comfort." The words didn't land like a punch. They landed like a coffin lid shutting. Keanu's lips tightened. "You're saying there's nothing else?" The other doctor, older and visibly weighed down by years of similar conversations, sighed. "There's no shame in letting her rest. She's fought hard." Keanu stared at the tiled floor for a long beat. "She's still breathing. She's still fighting. So I will too." They nodded, respectfully stepping back, giving him space. But in their eyes, he could see it. They'd already moved on. They were preparing for an ending. He wasn't. Back inside the room, Kim stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, weak but aware. "You okay?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper. He pulled a blanket up over her shoulders and smiled softly. "Yeah, I'm just thinking." She didn't ask for details. She knew him too well. They had a quiet language that required no explanation. That night, Keanu sat in the corner with a borrowed laptop and began what would become a relentless crusade. He wasn't a doctor, but he was a reader, a learner, a fighter. He researched everything from immunotherapy trials in Switzerland to nutritional protocols from obscure clinics in Japan. He scribbled notes on napkins, bookmarked dozens of articles, printed pages of abstracts and findings. He joined online forums under an alias, messaging caregivers and patients who had survived against the odds. The next morning, while the world outside carried on, Keanu sat with a doctor from Germany on a Zoom call, trying to translate the subtleties of a cutting-edge enzyme therapy. Then came a call to a meditation healer in Northern California. Then a late-night conversation with a dietary specialist in Tel Aviv. Money wasn't an obstacle. Time was. Every second mattered. Every new idea came with a ticking clock. Kim would wake occasionally to find her brother dozing in a chair, notes scattered across his lap, highlighters in his hand, research tabs open across two screens. But when she looked closely, she'd see the quiet fire in his eyes. He wasn't giving up. By the end of the week, Keanu had arranged 3 consultations with alternative medicine experts. Some came in person, others via video call. The hospital staff initially hesitated, but Evelyn, the nurse who had watched Keanu's dedication from day one, stepped in. "Let him try," she told the hospital director. "I've worked in this place for 22 years. I've never seen anyone fight like that." The director paused, then nodded. "All right. He gets 1 week." Keanu smiled quietly when he heard. 1 week was more than enough to start rewriting a fate that science had tried to close the book on. The transformation began not in the lab, but in the energy that surrounded Kim's hospital room. With permission secured, Keanu transformed her sterile beige space into something softer. He placed small plants by the windowsill, photos of their childhood, beach trips, Christmas mornings, silly grins, covered the wall opposite her bed. A tiny speaker now played gentle piano music during the day and ambient forest sounds at night. He began introducing changes in her routine, nothing invasive, nothing dangerous, just hope, disguised as new possibilities. First came the nutrient-focused smoothie blends, tailored by a nutritionist who'd helped late-stage cancer patients in Europe. Kim made a face the first time he coaxed her into sipping the green mixture through a straw. "Taste like sadness," she whispered. Keanu laughed, genuinely laughed, and kissed her forehead. "Healing isn't always pretty." Next, a practitioner in guided breathwork joined by video call. At first, Kim was too tired, but one afternoon, her eyes fluttered open while Keanu was practicing beside her. His eyes were closed, chest rising and falling with quiet rhythm. She tried copying him, just for a few breaths. She fell asleep more peacefully than she had in days. Keanu tracked everything: her heart rate, her appetite, her white blood cell counts. Each small sign of improvement was met with silent celebration, each setback met with steadier resolve. The hospital's oncologist, Dr. Patel, dropped by one evening, expecting to see a man broken by desperation. Instead, he found Keanu calmly journaling by Kim's bedside. "You've made quite the impression on my staff," he said with a measured tone. Keanu looked up. "I'm not trying to impress anyone." "I know," Dr. Patel replied. "That's what makes it real." Some nurses began stopping by the room after their shifts, not because they had to, but because they felt drawn to it. To the stillness, to the energy that said, "We are not done yet." Word spread. Other patients' families started asking about the quiet actor in room 304. Some brought books he'd been reading. A few asked questions about breathwork and anti-inflammatory foods. Without trying to, Keanu had sparked a ripple through the hospital. But behind all the small victories were the quiet hours no one saw. Keanu still wept into the bathroom sink some nights, biting his hand so Kim wouldn't hear. He still looked at her blood reports with trembling fingers, still wrote notes to himself like, "Don't break in front of her. Stay steady." And he still whispered into her ear every night before sleeping in that recliner chair, "Tomorrow, we try again." Every day was a coin toss, but he never let her see fear in his eyes, only presence. The new therapies didn't produce miracles overnight, but they planted something that traditional medicine hadn't: belief. Kim started staying awake longer. Her nausea wasn't gone, but it lessened. She laughed more. And for the first time in weeks, Keanu saw something flicker in her that he hadn't seen since the diagnosis. Fight. Kim's fight wasn't loud. It didn't come with heroic speeches or sudden turnarounds. It came in whispers, in her reaching for the glass of water herself instead of waiting for Keanu. In the way she started asking questions again, about the outside world, about books, about movies. It came in the faint flush returning to her cheeks. Keanu never made promises he couldn't keep, but one morning as she stirred awake, he leaned in close and said, "The sun's out. Let's open the blinds today." She smiled weakly. "You just want me to get freckles." "No," he whispered. "I want you to remember what warmth feels like." By now, doctors had stopped telling him to prepare for the worst. Dr. Patel pulled him aside one day, his expression hard to read. "I don't know what you're doing," he said, "but she's stabilizing. Her vitals are stronger, her cell counts are holding. It's not statistically likely, but it's happening." Keanu nodded once. He didn't celebrate, he didn't cry. He went straight back to Kim's room, sat beside her, and just held her hand. That night, Kim whispered, "I feel different." Keanu looked at her, his voice steady, full of meaning. "You're still here, and that's everything." That was the first night he allowed himself to hope. Not the fragile, flickering hope he'd clung to in the beginning, but something deeper, stronger, rooted in the truth that even when science gives up, love might just keep walking. The hospital had become a second home, but it had also become a battlefront. One where Keanu had quietly declared war not just on cancer, but on despair. And day by day, Kim was winning, not because of one drug or one breakthrough, but because someone had refused to let go. As he tucked her in and turned off the light, he whispered the same words he had every night. "Tomorrow we fight again." Keanu stood at the threshold of the guest room, staring into a space that once held distant memories of quiet visitors and occasional laughter. Now, it had to become something else entirely. A sanctuary, a second chance, a lifeline. The hospital had done all it could. But sterile walls and fluorescent lights had begun to strip away what little strength Kim had left. Her body was there, but her spirit, flickering and fragile, needed something more than beeping monitors and sterile corridors. Keanu could feel it in his bones. She needed warmth. She needed home. With quiet urgency, he called Tommy. "I need your help again," Keanu said over the phone, his voice calm but heavy. "But this time, we're not fixing a bike. We're building a healing room." Tommy didn't ask questions. Within hours, he was at the house, tool belt on, eyes scanning the room. Keanu had already pulled out the old bed and furniture. The windows were open to let in the mountain air. Soft rays of sunlight broke through, illuminating dust particles dancing like tiny angels. They got to work. The first step was airflow. Keanu insisted on installing a state-of-the-art air filtration system. Every breath Kim took had to feel pure, clean, untouched by hospital chemicals. Tommy helped wire it directly into the HVAC, running tubes through the crawl space, sealing every vent. Next came the bed, custom-built with a soft incline, memory foam, and side railings disguised beneath linen for dignity. Keanu wanted her to rest like royalty, not a patient. He ordered handmade Egyptian cotton sheets in Kim's favorite shade of pale lavender. Her old childhood blanket, stored in a cedar chest for decades, was laid gently across the foot of the bed. Keanu lined the windows with sheer white curtains, letting natural light filter in during the day while giving privacy at night. The walls were repainted soft sage green, calming, cool, and alive. A sound system was discreetly installed behind a wooden shelf, ready to play the soft jazz and old ballads Kim loved. Then came the most important element, presents. Keanu placed fresh wildflowers in a small vase by the window, new ones every day. A hand-picked stack of books sat beside the bed, poetry, fantasy, and a worn copy of Little Women with Kim's doodles in the margins from when they were kids. Across from the bed, a frame held a photo of the two of them at a beach in Maui, Keanu mid-laugh. He didn't just prepare a room, he prepared a world. When the room was finally ready, Keanu stood in the doorway again, this time with a quiet sense of purpose. It no longer looked like a spare bedroom. It looked like a prayer whispered into reality. Kim arrived that afternoon in a private transport van. She was pale, her body slumped, eyes heavy from weeks of exhaustion. But when she saw her brother waiting in the driveway, arms open, a flicker of warmth returned to her face. He didn't say much, just held her hand and guided her gently inside. As the wheels of her chair crossed the threshold into the newly transformed room, Kim gasped softly. Her gaze swept across the walls, the flowers, the soft light filtering in through the curtains. When she saw her childhood blanket, she burst into quiet tears. This isn't a room," she whispered, voice barely audible. Keanu knelt beside her. "No," he said softly. "It's hope, wrapped in cotton sheets." A nurse named Clara had been hired to stay full-time, living in a small guest suite nearby. She had decades of experience in end-of-life care, but something about this case felt different. From the moment she arrived, Clara noticed how Keanu moved. He didn't just tend to Kim like a caretaker. He moved through the house like a protector, a brother, a silent guardian praying with every gesture. He brewed herbal tea based on the research he'd read, helped her sit up during the worst moments of nausea, played her favorite Nina Simone song as the sun went down each night. He didn't force optimism. He just showed up, fully in every breath. And something began to shift. Kim, though still weak, smiled more. Her appetite returned in spurts. On some days, she asked to sit outside on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, just to feel the breeze on her face. Keanu would sit beside her, reading aloud or quietly watching the sky. One morning, she asked for paintbrushes. "I just want to feel color again," she murmured. Keanu set up a small easel by the window. Each stroke was shaky, each canvas barely filled, but her hands were moving. Her soul, dormant and battered, was trying to speak. That night, after Kim had fallen asleep, Clara found Keanu sitting in the hallway, back against the wall, tears silently streaming down his face. "She painted," he said simply. "She wanted color." Clara smiled, kneeling beside him. "Then we're winning." Weeks passed. The recovery room became more than a space for healing. It became a sanctuary of stories. Friends sent letters. Former castmates dropped by quietly, offering meals, flowers, books. Tommy brought over an old guitar and taught Keanu how to play a few calming melodies. Sometimes Kim would hum along faintly, the music soothing something deep within her. So, as within her, one day Keanu walked in to find a note on her bed. It was in Kim's handwriting. "Today I stood by the window for 10 minutes. 10 whole minutes. I'm still here, because you keep giving me a reason to be." Keanu sat down beside the letter and let himself cry. Not from sadness, but from the fragile joy that comes with watching a miracle grow, one breath at a time. He started keeping a journal again, not for himself, but for Kim. Every day, he wrote something she did, a small victory, a smile, a moment of courage. He titled the notebook, "The Book of Staying." And when Kim was strong enough, he read it aloud to her. "You brought life in," she whispered once, hand in his. Keanu smiled softly. "We brought it in together." The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, hope had a home. The morning sun filtered softly through the sheer curtains, casting a pale golden glow across the room. Kim stirred slightly, her breath shallow but steady. Keanu was already awake, sitting in the corner armchair with a steaming mug of black coffee, his eyes locked on her face. Every rise and fall of her chest felt like a prayer answered. For days now, their world had narrowed to this room, but Keanu had made it a sanctuary, a space filled with life, not death. Fresh flowers rotated in vases on the windowsill. A Bluetooth speaker played soft jazz in the background. Photographs lined the dresser, the two of them as kids, their mother holding them at the beach. A Polaroid of Kim on her bike before the diagnosis. This morning was different. Kim's eyelids fluttered, then her lips parted. She struggled, but a word formed. "What?" Keanu was at her side in seconds, a straw already in hand. He held it to her lips with the gentleness of a father cradling an infant. She sipped. Her fingers twitched, reaching slowly for his. "You sat here all night, again," she rasped. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "And I'll sit here every night if it means you'll ask for water again." Kim gave a tiny hoarse laugh. It was faint, but it was a laugh. Keanu didn't cry, though his chest ached. He wasn't allowing himself the luxury of tears. Not yet. There was still too much road to walk, and she needed him strong. Later that day, she managed a few spoonfuls of mashed potatoes. It took 15 minutes. Keanu documented the moment on a notepad, just like every other miracle they'd seen in the past week. Day 34. Ate 4 spoonfuls, spoke 3 full sentences, laughed once, miracle count 3. He kept the notepad in a drawer next to her bed. It wasn't for science. It was for his soul. They spent the afternoon watching old home videos on a mounted screen. Grainy footage flickered across the room. Kim in pigtails doing cartwheels, Keanu teaching her how to kick a soccer ball, their mother cheering in the background. Kim's fingers clutched his, her eyes welled with tears. "I forgot what her voice sounded like," she whispered. "I never did," Keanu replied. "It's in your laugh, still there." The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was reverent. Later that night, Keanu found a folded piece of paper under her pillow. A letter, dated that morning, in shaky handwriting. "Even if I go, I'm going loved." And that's more than most people ever get. Keanu sat in the recliner and read it 5 times. Then, carefully, he folded it back up and tucked it against his heart. "No," he whispered into the quiet. "You're not going anywhere." The next morning brought a quiet milestone. Kim reached for her own glass of water. It wasn't graceful. Her hand trembled. She nearly spilled it. But when she managed to bring it to her lips, Keanu clapped softly like she'd just won an Olympic medal. Kim smirked, weak but amused. "Overkill," she whispered. He shook his head. "That was gold medal hydration. I'm not letting that go unnoticed." Small moments like these were all they had, and Keanu celebrated each one like it mattered more than a box office hit. He marked the progress on the notepad again. Day 35. Drank water unassisted. Miracle count, 1, but it felt like 10. That afternoon, Keanu brought in an old piano keyboard they used to play as kids. He set it on a table beside her bed, hoping the sight of it might bring comfort. "I remember this," she said faintly. "Mom hated it. Thought we'd be rock stars in the garage forever." "We weren't that bad," Keanu replied with a grin. "You had rhythm. You had none." They both chuckled, and in that laugh time seemed to fold in on itself. For a moment they were kids again. No chemo, no fear, just music and teasing. By evening, Kim had enough strength to sit propped up in bed while Keanu played a simple tune. Just a few notes, clumsy and off-key, but filled with heart. "Play the one Mom loved," Kim murmured. He hesitated, his fingers hovered above the keys. Then he began. It was slow, uneven, but it was enough to bring a tear to her eye. She looked at him, really looked, and whispered, "You stayed." Keanu didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. His presence was the answer. His whole life had narrowed to this moment, one note at a time, one breath, one heartbeat, beside hers. That night she held his hand longer than usual. "I used to be scared," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of going, and of staying. But now I'm just grateful I got to be here this long, with you." Keanu leaned closer, brushing her knuckles with his thumb. "Then we'll keep going. A day at a time." Outside the window, the moon was high and full. Inside, the soft hum of the oxygen machine blended with the rhythm of their breathing. A day at a time. A miracle at a time. The next few weeks passed like slow-moving weather, some days warm with hope, others cold and quiet. Keanu kept his notepad close, now filled with notes only he could decipher. Day 43. Sat up twice. Held spoon. No nausea. Day 48. Smiled during movie. Asked for toast. Day 51. Laughed, out loud. First time in weeks. He treated each improvement like a resurrection, not because it was miraculous in scale, but because it meant she was still here. One afternoon, while trimming a vase of fresh lilies by her bedside, Kim asked softly, "Do you think I'll get better? Or are you just pretending?" Keanu stopped mid-trim. He looked at her, met her gaze fully. "I'm not pretending," he said. "I believe in you. That's different." Her eyes glistened. "Even if I don't?" He nodded. "That's what makes it belief." Later that night, Kim handed Keanu a folded piece of paper. "Another letter," she said. "For your collection." He tucked it into the shoebox where he kept them all, never opening them in front of her. It was their unspoken agreement. They were for later, in case there was no later. But when she drifted off to sleep, he opened this one. "I know I'm still weak, but you make me feel strong. I know I'm still sick, but you make me feel whole. Even if I go, I want you to know, I didn't just survive because of the medicine. I survived because someone refused to stop believing in me. You? Always you." Keanu closed the letter, held it against his heart, and exhaled into the silence. The house, dimly lit and still, felt full of something invisible but powerful. Hope that had no shape, no formula, just love, persistent and steady. As he tucked the blanket higher around her frail shoulders, he whispered more to himself than to her. "Then you're not going anywhere." Outside, the wind rustled the trees gently. Inside, the war against death was still being fought, not with weapons, but with presence, with patience, with love so unwavering it could turn minutes into miracles. They didn't count time in weeks anymore. They counted it in glances, in smiles, in spoons held without help, a day at a time, and that was enough. The room was silent, too silent. It was the kind of stillness that made time stretch, every second an echo. Keanu sat by Kim's bedside as he had for weeks, barely blinking, his eyes locked on her chest as it rose and fell. Every breath was measured, precious, fragile. Then suddenly, it stopped. Her chest didn't rise. Keanu leaned forward. "Kim, nothing." He shot up, knocking over the chair, his heart slamming against his ribs. He pressed the emergency button with the force of a man trying to shatter time itself. "Help!" he shouted, voice cracking in a way that terrified even him. "She's not breathing!" Nurses burst in within seconds. Evelyn was first, already pulling on gloves. "Call crash," she barked to the others, moving with swift, practiced efficiency. Keanu stumbled backward as they began emergency resuscitation. Evelyn leaned in over Kim, performing chest compressions, while another nurse prepared the oxygen bag. Keanu stood frozen in the corner, gripping the wall like it was the only thing holding him upright. His eyes never left Kim's face. "Come on, Kim," Evelyn muttered between compressions. "Come on, sweetheart, not like this." 20 seconds. That's how long her heart stopped. 20 seconds in which Keanu's world completely unraveled. A short gasp finally escaped Kim's lips. Her eyes fluttered open. Just barely. "She's back," Evelyn said softly, almost like a prayer. "She's back." Keanu sank to his knees and wept. Not quiet tears. Not cinematic sadness. He broke. Racking sobs shook his body, the sound raw and unfiltered. He buried his face in his hands, ashamed to look at her, but too relieved not to feel it. Evelyn knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "She almost left me," Keanu whispered. "She didn't," Evelyn said. "You were here. You're always here." Later that night, after the room calmed and Kim had drifted back into a fragile sleep, Keanu remained seated by her side, head bowed. Evelyn brought him tea. He took it with trembling hands, but didn't drink. "You know," she said gently, "when my brother died, he was alone." Keanu turned to her, eyes swollen and hollow. "Hal didn't have anyone," she continued. "I was stuck in another state working nights. He didn't tell me how bad it was until it was too late. I live with that guilt every day." She paused. "But you, she'll never know that loneliness. She has you, and that matters more than medicine." Keanu looked back at Kim, her breathing now steady, her fingers twitching lightly beneath the blanket. "She's my family," he said quietly. "I'd trade every frame of film I've ever shot just to keep this heartbeat going." Evelyn smiled. "Then you're already doing more than most." Keanu didn't respond. He just reached over, gently brushing a strand of hair from Kim's forehead. His hand lingered there, still trembling, but full of something else now. Resolve. Morning crept in quietly, with soft golden light spilling through the blinds. It washed over Kim's face, illuminating her pale skin. Keanu hadn't slept. He didn't even pretend anymore. His journal lay open on the windowsill beside a cold cup of coffee. Scrawled in sharp, uneven ink were the words, "What do you do when your world lives in a body that keeps trying to leave?" He stared at the sentence for a long time, then slowly tore the page out and folded it. He slipped it under Kim's pillow, like a secret he wasn't ready to say aloud. By noon, he was on the phone with a nutritionist in Oregon, a cancer specialist in Germany, and a meditation therapist in Arizona. He juggled each call with the urgency of a man outrunning fate. "I'll pay whatever it takes," he repeated. "Just tell me what we haven't tried." His agent called again, this time gently. There was a major franchise looking for a lead. Big money, short shoot, easy work. Keanu didn't even ask what it was. "She's not stable," he replied. "That's the only role I care about right now." He hung up before hearing the response. That night, Evelyn returned to find Keanu on the floor of Kim's room, surrounded by books, binders, and handwritten notes, charts of supplement regimens, research papers on experimental immunotherapies, printouts of meditation scripts. "You, building a hospital," she teased gently. "I'm building a chance," Keanu murmured without looking up. Evelyn watched him in silence for a moment, her heart tugging at the sight. "Most people fold when they're told there's nothing left to do," she said. Keanu finally looked up, his eyes steady. "That's the problem with most people." Then he stood, crossed to Kim's side, and took her hand as he did every night. "Hey," he whispered, "you scared me yesterday. Don't do that again, okay?" Her eyes didn't open, but her fingers curled faintly around his. "Just enough." He smiled faintly. "That's my girl." He sat down, pulled out a small notebook, and began reading again. His voice calm, clear, loving. Chapter 12. The warrior stood alone in the darkness, but he wasn't afraid. He remembered the light that lived in him, and that was enough. Kim's breathing matched the rhythm of his words, and as the night returned, so did his strength. He couldn't save her yesterday, but tomorrow was still unwritten. The next morning, Kim opened her eyes. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden gasps or movie-style awakenings, just a slow blink, a slight turn of her head, and then the faintest whisper. Keanu dropped the tea he was holding. The porcelain shattered on the floor, but he didn't care. He was by her side in an instant. "I'm here," he said, voice breaking. "I'm right here." She blinked again, lips dry and cracking. "You didn't leave?" His laugh was part joy, part exhaustion. "You really think I could?" She tried to smile, but her face barely moved. "Water." He held the glass to her lips, guiding it gently. Just 2 sips. But 2 sips were everything. The nurse entered behind him, stunned to see her conscious. "She woke up?" Evelyn asked softly. Keanu nodded, eyes wide, still holding Kim's hand like a lifeline. She came back. Later that day, as Kim slept again, this time without fear, Keanu sat outside the room with Evelyn. "You were right," he told her. "It's not about not losing someone, it's about holding on through everything." She squeezed his shoulder gently. "You didn't just hold on, Keanu, you carried her." Inside the room, the machines beeped a little steadier, the monitors calmed. And in the hallway, for the first time in months, Keanu allowed himself to breathe. Because the breaking point had come, and love hadn't shattered. It had held. The first sign came quietly, so quietly that even the nurse almost missed it. A subtle shift in Kim's blood panel, a small spike in her neutrophil count, barely above the red line. But to Keanu, it felt like seeing the first crack of light after years in a cave. Dr. Hamidi, the newest specialist Keanu had flown in, studied the chart carefully. "It's not much," he said cautiously, "but it's something. The new immune modulator might be working. We'll monitor daily." Keanu didn't jump for joy. He didn't fist pump the air or even crack a full smile. But his fingers trembled as he held the paper. His heart pounded louder than it had in weeks. He walked quietly into Kim's room and sat beside her bed. She was asleep, face pale but peaceful, her breathing steady through the oxygen cannula. He didn't wake her. Instead, he reached into the brown leather satchel by the door, a gift from their father long ago, and pulled out a small cassette recorder. It was old, scratched, analog. He had found it in a box of childhood keepsakes in the garage. The tape still worked. The sound of rewinding was a sound he hadn't heard in decades, and now it comforted him. He pressed record. "Hey Kim, it's me. I know you're asleep, and that's okay. I just wanted to start something for the future." His voice wavered for a moment, but he steadied it. "I'm going to make you a tape for every birthday. I don't care what the doctors say. One for every year. One for every candle. And when you're strong enough, you'll listen to them, one by one." He paused, glancing at her hands, tucked under the blanket. He gently laid his palm over hers. "This one's for the next one, your next birthday. I know you'll be here for it, and if not, well, I'll still talk to you, but I believe you'll be here." The tape spun on. Keanu talked softly about the first time they had cake fights in the kitchen, about the time she broke her ankle chasing their neighbor's dog, about the time she beat him in a foot race at age 7 and never let him forget it. His voice wrapped the memories in something sacred, something real, something eternal. By the time the tape clicked to a stop, the sun had started to rise outside the window. The nurse peeked in and found him still sitting there, eyes focused on the machine like it was a lifeline. "Mr. Reeves?" she asked gently. "Her blood pressure's up." "That's good." Keanu nodded, swallowing hard. "Thanks. Let's keep going." He slipped the finished tape into a small wooden box, a label in his handwriting, "Birthday 1." The days that followed were a slow unfolding. No miracles, no sudden transformations, but the tiny improvements, measured in millimeters of mercury and white cell percentages, began to add up. Keanu never celebrated out loud. He was too afraid to jinx it. But he started allowing himself the smallest signs of hope. Kim could now stay awake for longer stretches. She even asked for music. Fleetwood Mac, her favorite. Keanu carefully placed a small speaker on the dresser and played "Landslide" at a whisper. He watched her lips form silent words, mouthing the lyrics as if each syllable had its own weight. One afternoon, while helping her sit upright, Keanu offered her a spoonful of mashed peaches. She took it slowly, then blinked and gave him a tiny smile. "Tastes like summer," she murmured. He almost broke down right there. Later that evening, he recorded another tape. This one he titled "Birthday 2." In it, he recounted the story of how she used to build makeshift forts out of their mother's scarves, pretending they were in Morocco or India. He laughed into the recorder, remembering how she once charged him a nickel to enter. "This is your second tape," he whispered. "We're still here." Inspired by that flicker of light, Keanu began reaching out again. Not to studios, but to healers, energy workers, acupuncturists, even a Tibetan monk who ran a retreat center in Oregon. He didn't care about optics. He cared only about giving Kim one more day, and then another. Tommy stopped by more frequently, sometimes just to sit in the kitchen and keep Keanu company. On one visit, he brought a new batch of air purifiers and a bouquet of fresh lavender. "Clears the space," he said simply, setting them near the window. That night, Keanu wrote in his journal, the same one he'd kept since the diagnosis. "She's more than a patient now. She's a fighter. She always was. I just never saw the war." Kim's own resilience surprised even the doctors. One of them, Dr. Patel, paused in the doorway during rounds and said softly, "She's writing her own script now, and we're just the audience." Keanu smiled, the kind of smile that carried both exhaustion and faith. Every evening, as the sky turned orange and the breeze picked up through the trees, he and Kim would watch old home videos together. She'd hold the remote in her thinning fingers, fast-forwarding to the parts where she'd fall off a sled or prank him by hiding his socks. They laughed. Real laughter. Quiet, but real. Keanu began sketching plans for a garden outside her window, somewhere with wind chimes, a water fountain, and bright yellow marigolds. "Color and sound," he said to Evelyn, who helped with the logistics. "Healing doesn't stop at the body." And with every quiet win, he added another tape to the wooden box. Birthday 3, then Birthday 4. He didn't know how many more there would be, but each one meant she was still here. And for him, that was everything. One early morning, Keanu stepped outside with a mug of tea, letting the steam rise into the crisp air. The silence was comforting, but it was no longer hollow. Behind him, inside the house, something fragile had begun to mend. Kim was asleep, her breathing steady. It wasn't just medicine. It wasn't just therapy. It was presence. Constant, unshaken, unwavering love. That, Keanu believed, was its own kind of medicine. He glanced toward the garden plot he and Tommy had started tilling last week. The ground was still hard, the soil reluctant to turn, but just like Kim's recovery, it didn't matter how long it took. What mattered was the intent, the effort, the willingness to plant hope, even when the odds said nothing would grow. Back inside, Keanu quietly opened Kim's door. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. The light from the window painted her pale skin in soft gold. The lavender bouquet by the nightstand fluttered gently under the fan's breeze. He sat down and pressed record on the next cassette. His voice trembled just a little. "Hey Kim, it's tape number 5 now. You slept all through the night. First time in a while. I think we're turning a corner." He paused. "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but today, I'm grateful. For your smile, for this quiet, for one more page in our story." He placed the tape in the wooden box, now nearly half full. As he closed the lid, he whispered, "Let's keep going." The world outside had no idea what Keanu Reeves was going through. While inside his home, a quiet battle for his sister's life unfolded day by day. The outside world buzzed with speculation. The paparazzi were growing restless. Keanu had been off the radar for nearly a year. No red carpets, no movie premieres, no appearances. For a man known for his humility and work ethic, his disappearance was raising eyebrows. Gossip blogs churned out wild guesses: burnout, secret vacation, relationship rumors, but none of them came close to the truth. No one guessed that he was waking up each day beside a hospital bed, brushing his sister's hair, or changing her IV bag at 2 in the morning. Then, one sharp-eyed entertainment journalist, Maria Lenz, known for her work with integrity in a field full of noise, decided to dig deeper. She had once interviewed Keanu years ago and remembered the way he deflected praise, always bringing the spotlight back to others. Something about his disappearance felt different, like the story wasn't about vanity but sacrifice. She reached out to a few former coworkers. One, a lighting technician on a canceled project, told her Keanu had dropped out suddenly, saying only family emergency. Another source, who worked security at the hospital, confirmed discreetly that Keanu was frequently seen in the oncology wing, always in a hoodie and baseball cap, head down, holding his sister's hand. Maria followed the trail, fact-checking everything twice. Then she published it. Not a tabloid hit piece, but a moving profile that took the world by storm. Keanu Reeves gives up Hollywood to save his sister. The article featured no invasive photos, just facts, a timeline of canceled projects, witness accounts of him staying overnight in hospital rooms, a quote from a nurse who said, "He sat by her side every single night. He never asked for special treatment, just a chair and a quiet room." The internet ignited. Hashtags like Real Hero Keanu and Family First began trending within hours. Within 24 hours, the article reached millions of readers. Social media exploded with stories of fans sharing how they had watched his movies during chemotherapy, how his quiet strength had meant something deeper now. People weren't just admiring his acting anymore, they were honoring the man behind the roles. Letters poured in, messages of hope, handwritten cards from leukemia survivors and families of patients. Artists sent portraits of Keanu and Kim. A children's cancer foundation launched a donation drive in her honor, and in just 3 days it raised over $500,000 for leukemia research. Celebrities joined in. Sandra Bullock sent a note, "You remind us what real love looks like." Denzel Washington made a donation to a hospital in Kim's name. Even major studios released statements of support, promising Keanu's roles would be waiting if and when he returned. But Keanu didn't post a word, didn't appear on any talk shows. He didn't even read the article at first. His focus remained on Kim, whose condition was stable but fragile. When Tommy knocked on the door holding a stack of letters from fans around the world, Keanu looked up from the floor of Kim's room. He was stretching her legs gently so she wouldn't lose muscle tone. "Mail's coming in faster than the doctor's charts," Tommy joked softly, setting the box down. Keanu nodded, but his eyes drifted back to Kim. He'd never done it for attention, and yet, somehow, the world had noticed. Keanu didn't react to the attention, not in public, not even in private. When Tommy showed him the article on a folded newspaper, he quietly read the headline, let his eyes rest on the photo of him walking beside Kim's wheelchair, then folded it again and set it aside. There was no smile, no pride, just a pause. "She still needs breakfast," he said simply. But inside, the article had stirred something, not for himself, but for Kim. When she read it, tears filled her eyes. "You should have told them," she whispered. "Told them what?" Keanu replied gently. "That you were saving me." He shook his head, brushing back a loose strand of her thinning hair. "No," he said, voice quiet but firm. "You're saving me." That night, Kim asked to sit near a window. She looked out at the stars while Keanu helped her sip warm broth. He read another letter aloud, this one from a teenager in Georgia whose older brother had also paused college to take care of her during chemo. "Now I know," the girl wrote, "that love like that changes everything." The next day, the hospital director asked Keanu if he'd consider making a public statement or joining a charity campaign. They wanted to ride the wave of attention for good causes. The PR team was ready. He declined politely. "This isn't a campaign," he said. "It's just family." But still, the ripple effect continued. Several of the letters Kim received came from parents who had almost given up, and after reading Maria's article, found the strength to fight harder. A family from Brazil emailed a picture of their little boy in a Superman cape, calling Keanu his new hero. A hospital in Japan started a Keanu Corner, filled with uplifting notes and drawings from pediatric cancer patients. And then came the most unexpected gesture of all. One morning, a limousine pulled up in front of the hospital. A woman stepped out with a check in her hand, $1 million, made out to leukemia research in Kim Reeves' name. No cameras, no press, just one note attached. Because the world needs more people like her brother. Keanu never found out who sent it. He never asked. Inside the hospital, staff whispered that they'd never seen anything like it, not just the donations or attention, but the way Keanu moved through the hallways with quiet humility, always asking nurses if they'd eaten, thanking janitors for their work, listening more than speaking. One of the oncology doctors, Dr. Reiner, told a colleague, "It's like watching someone build a cathedral out of patience. Every gesture is a brick." But through it all, Keanu's focus never shifted. The fame, the headlines, the letters, he accepted them as passing winds. What mattered was Kim's breathing, her coloring, her appetite, her smile. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something changed in her. She laughed a little more, sat up a little longer, ate 2 spoonfuls instead of 1. Outside, the world buzzed with praise. But inside, Keanu knew the real miracle wasn't what people were saying about him. It was the way Kim's eyes began to shine again. The story had reached millions. But the only story he cared about was still unfolding. One heartbeat, one breath, one quiet act of love at a time. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the quiet of stillness, of healing in motion. Keanu sat beside Kim on the sun-warmed porch, a blanket draped over her legs, a mug of chamomile tea in her hands. She had enough strength now to sit up on her own, and that alone felt like a miracle. The sun had just dipped behind the hills, casting the sky in golden streaks, and Keanu leaned back in his chair, stretching out his legs. He glanced over at her, his eyes scanning the subtle color returning to her face. She looked out at the trees swaying in the breeze, breathing deeply as if memorizing the moment. He decided to risk it. "You know," he began with a grin, "if your cooking ever tasted like your medical reports, we'd both be in the hospital." Kim blinked. Then she snorted, an awkward, startled sound, and broke into a full, spontaneous laugh. The kind of laugh that carried air and life and disbelief all at once. Keanu froze, as if scared that moving would shatter the sound. He stared at her, his mouth open slightly. It wasn't just a giggle or a half smile. It was a real, belly-deep laugh. He didn't say a word. His throat clenched. He lowered his head into his hands, shoulders trembling. Not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming release of gratitude. She was laughing. She was alive enough to laugh. Kim leaned toward him, breathless from her chuckles. "What kind of joke even was that?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "The best kind," Keanu murmured, voice cracking. "The kind that steals a piece of heaven back." Later that evening, Kim was feeling unusually alert. Keanu suggested they bake cookies, not from a store-bought mix, but from scratch, the way they used to as kids. Kim's eyes lit up with mischief. "Do you even remember how to make cookies?" she teased. "I remember just enough to be dangerous." They shuffled into the kitchen together. Kim's balance wasn't great, but Keanu steadied her with a hand on her back. She measured the flour. He cracked the eggs. Most of them ended up on the counter. Laughter echoed off the walls. She forgot to set the timer. He forgot the baking soda. By the time the tray was out of the oven, the cookies looked like meteorites, burnt on the bottom, gooey on top. They stared at the tray, then burst into laughter again, pure, breathless, childlike joy. Kim leaned on the kitchen island, wiping tears of amusement from her eyes. "Did we just steal back a day?" Keanu smiled, eyes wet again. "No," he whispered. "We bought a whole life." The smell of burned cookies lingered in the air like the aftermath of a wild experiment, but neither of them cared. They sat on the kitchen floor, legs stretched out in front of them, a pile of crumbled dough on a plate between them. Kim reached for the least scorched one, bit into it, and winced. "Oh, wow," she laughed, waving a hand in front of her mouth. "It tastes like revenge." Keanu grinned. Revenge of the flourless kind. Kim gave him a soft shove. Her laugh was quieter this time, but it carried something deeper. Healing. She leaned her head back against the lower cabinet, closing her eyes for a moment. "Do you think we'll remember this?" she asked after a beat, her voice suddenly fragile. "I think we'll never forget it," Keanu replied. She looked at him. "Even if, things don't go how we want them to?" He turned to face her fully. "That's not the question anymore. The question is how much we're going to live in every moment we do get. Because if tonight is all we have, then tonight is enough." She nodded, silent for a moment. Then she whispered, "I wish I could freeze this." "You don't need to," he said. "You're living it." Later, Kim asked if they could do something else ridiculous, like dance. Keanu blinked. "Dance? You?" "I want to remember what it feels like to move just because I want to," she said. "Not because someone's checking my vitals or timing my steps." He didn't hesitate. He gently helped her to her feet, steadied her, and then shuffled over to the old radio on the shelf. A soft vinyl crackle gave way to the notes of a slow jazz tune, something their mother used to play when they were young. Kim leaned her head against his chest, feet barely swaying. He led gently, not really dancing, but more like rocking, letting the music wrap around them like a blanket. No one else saw it, no cameras, no social media, just a brother and a sister, suspended in time. When the song ended, Kim smiled into his shoulder. "Thank you for fighting so hard," she whispered. Keanu kissed the top of her head. "You gave me something to fight for." They didn't talk much after that, just held on to the stillness as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. And in a way it was. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. catching the flower dust still hanging in the air. Keanu woke early, as usual, but instead of his usual routine of meds and charts, he just stood in the hallway, watching his sister sleep curled on the living room couch. Her face looked softer now, not because she wasn't sick, but because she wasn't suffering, not in that moment. Something had shifted. Kim stirred and opened her eyes slowly. "Did we survive the cookie apocalypse?" she mumbled, her voice still hoarse but playful. Keanu chuckled. "Barely. You almost burned down my house." "Well," she said, stretching gently. "Worth it?" He walked over and knelt beside her, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a tiny Polaroid photo he'd snapped the night before. Her laughing, head thrown back, crumbs on her cheek. "I printed it," he said, "proof that we laughed." Kim held the photo close to her chest, eyes welling with emotion. "You didn't just save my life, Keanu. You reminded me how to live it." And for the first time in months, Keanu believed, truly believed, that they were going to be okay. The first sign came quietly, so subtle that even the nurses missed it. Kim's white blood cell count, which had stubbornly hovered in the danger zone for weeks, ticked up by a single point, then another, and another. Slowly, over the course of days, her body, frail and weathered from relentless chemo and endless nights of struggle, began to respond. Dr. Avery held the latest chart in her hand, staring at it longer than usual. This wasn't supposed to happen," she murmured, more to herself than to Keanu. He looked up from his chair in the corner, where he'd been reading aloud from Kim's favorite book of poetry, his voice hoarse from sleep deprivation. "What do you mean?" he asked, carefully setting the book down. "She's turning a corner. Her immune system is rebuilding. We've tried everything, but nothing could have predicted this." She glanced at the chart again, her expression caught between disbelief and awe. "If I had to describe it in one word, it's a miracle." Keanu didn't smile, he didn't jump out of his chair. He just stood up, walked over to the glass window that overlooked the city, and placed his hand against it. For a moment, the weight of the past months, the despair, the sleepless nights, the prayers whispered into the dark, came crashing down in a wave of emotion. He stepped out onto the hospital balcony alone, letting the wind hit his face. He looked up at the sky and allowed the tears to come. Real tears, not the silent ones he'd held back beside Kim's bed, not the ones he buried under brave smiles and hopeful lies. These were tears of release, of exhaustion, of faith rewarded. The night air was cool and crisp, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel heavy, it felt alive. Inside, Kim stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open and she reached for the small bell by her bedside. Evelyn, the nurse who had been with them since the darkest days, entered the room and smiled. "Hey," Kim whispered, her voice faint but not broken. "You've got him to thank," Eileen said, nodding toward the window. "He's the reason you're still here." Kim blinked back tears. "No, we're the reason." Meanwhile, Keanu returned, wiping his face discreetly as he stepped back into the room. Kim saw his red eyes and said nothing. She didn't have to. Their bond had always gone beyond words. Later that afternoon, Keanu helped Kim into a wheelchair and wheeled her out into the small garden just off the hospital wing. Spring had just begun to bloom, and the air carried the scent of fresh soil and jasmine. In the center of the garden stood a young tree, unplanted, resting against a spade and a bag of soil. "What's that?" Kim asked softly. "It's ours," Keanu replied. "A red maple. I figured if we were going to come back from the edge, we should leave something behind, something that keeps growing." Kim's lips quivered, then curled into a trembling smile. "Let's plant it together." And so they did, slowly, hand in hand, digging into the soil and gently placing the roots into the earth. With each scoop of dirt, they buried a piece of the pain, the fear, and the shadow of the past. The tree stood tall, defiant against the odds, just like them. Kim's hands were weak, trembling as she pressed the soil around the base of the young maple. Keanu steadied her wrist gently, silently guiding her movements. Neither said much. They didn't need to. For months, the world had shrunk to IV drips and EKG beeps, hushed conversations behind doors, and fragile hope drawn in crayon across paper. Now it expanded again to the sky above, the scent of turned earth, and the leaves of a tree that would long outlive either of them. It was the first time Kim had felt the sun on her skin in weeks. "I can't believe I'm out here," she whispered, her voice a mix of wonder and disbelief. 2 weeks ago, I couldn't move." Keanu pressed a hand to her shoulder. "2 weeks ago, you were fighting. You still are." She looked up at him, her eyes glassy. "I was ready to go, you know." "I wasn't," he replied. The wind picked up, shaking loose a few early leaves. They drifted gently between them and landed at their feet. That night, Keanu sat at the kitchen table back home, alone. The house was quiet, dimly lit. He stared at a blank sheet of paper, then picked up a pen and began to write. Love isn't medicine. It doesn't come in dosages or prescriptions. It can't be injected or scanned or charted, but it heals. God, does it heal. He folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it beneath Kim's pillow before she came home from the hospital. The next morning, she found it. Her eyes welled up before she finished the second line. "I guess we're both writers now," she joked. They had started something no diagnosis could stop. Kim began walking across the living room on her own, one step at a time. Keanu documented every inch of progress with his old camcorder. They took turns writing messages on sticky notes and leaving them in odd places, under coffee mugs taped to door frames, slipped into shoes. One read, "You were my miracle." Another, "You stayed when everyone said you should run." The house was transforming, becoming more than just a recovery suite. It became a sanctuary, a museum of survival. And outside the window, the maple tree caught the morning sun, casting long, hopeful shadows across the grass. As summer turned to fall, the tree in their garden began to change. Its leaves took on a brilliant hue of amber and gold, like a celebration of life itself. Kim and Keanu would sit by the window each morning with mugs of tea, watching it sway gently in the breeze, a living monument to their fight. One afternoon, Kim whispered, "Do you think the tree knows?" Keanu smiled, resting his chin on his hand. "It knows. It grew from the same soil we did." That night, Keanu stepped out onto the balcony again. He looked up at the stars, then down at the glow coming from Kim's room. She was sleeping peacefully. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. "She is back," he whispered to the night. "And so am I." It wasn't just a return to life. It was a return to living. And from that moment on, neither of them took a single day for granted. The morning sun spread like a golden veil across the garden, casting long shadows between the trees Keanu and Kim had planted during their quiet battle with death. There was a serenity in the air, a stillness that seemed to hold its breath for something sacred. Keanu stood by the kitchen window, cradling a warm mug between his palms, watching the yard through glass streaked with the remnants of last night's light rain. A soft creak behind him made him turn. Kim was at the doorframe. No walker, no nurse at her side, just Kim, pale but determined, leaning slightly on the wooden frame, a familiar gleam in her tired eyes. "I think I'm ready," she whispered. Keanu didn't move. He didn't even breathe for a second. He only nodded, slowly placing his cup on the counter. His steps were careful as he approached her, as if afraid the moment might evaporate. But he didn't touch her. He knew she didn't want help. One foot forward, then another. It was barely a dozen steps across the dewy grass, but to Keanu, it felt like watching the earth turn for the very first time. He pulled out his phone and began recording, hands trembling slightly. The camera captured her small smile, the wobble in her knees, the breeze teasing strands of her hair, and the slow, unstoppable strength that carried her across the yard. When she reached the center of the garden, she stopped, turned toward the house, and raised both arms triumphantly. Keanu lowered the camera and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His eyes shimmered, and for the first time in a long time, his smile came easily. "I told you," she called out, "you'd never have to carry me forever." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh only exhaustion and joy could produce. Then he jogged to her and scooped her up in a light embrace, careful of her still healing frame. "You carried yourself," he said. "I just stayed beside you." Back inside the house, she pulled an envelope from a drawer in the hallway. "I was saving this," she said, "for the day I walked again." He took it carefully, unfolding the letter inside. It was one of the hundreds he had written her, but this time, the handwriting was hers. Keanu sat on the couch beside her as he read the letter, eyes tracing each word with reverence. "You once wrote to me, 'Even if your feet can't carry you, my love will.'" I memorized that line. It became my mantra. I read it every night when the pain wouldn't let me sleep. I repeated it every morning when I doubted I'd see another one. "You gave me more than medicine. You gave me presence. You gave me permission to hope. You were the constant heartbeat beside my silence. Thank you for keeping your promise. I never felt alone." Keanu's throat tightened. He blinked hard, pressing the paper to his chest. Kim leaned her head against his shoulder. "I wanted to say it out loud," she murmured, "but I knew I'd cry." "I'm already crying," he said with a weak laugh, tears streaming freely now. That evening, the Reeves home was filled with life. Kim insisted on hosting a thank-you dinner. Just something small, she said, but it grew into a tapestry of faces that had become family through crisis. Evelyn, the nurse who sat through the darkest nights, arrived first with a casserole and the warmest hug. Tommy came with grease-stained hands and a bouquet of sunflowers. Maya, a childhood friend turned acupuncturist, brought homemade teas and her gentle spirit. The table was lined with simple food, mismatched chairs, and candlelight. There was no press, no social media, no grand spectacle, just warmth. As laughter danced around the room, Keanu stood quietly, holding his glass. He raised it slowly, drawing the attention of the table. "To presence," he said, voice steady but emotional. "To the people who didn't try to fix everything, but chose to stay. To the ones who sat in silence and made it feel safe. To every soul who became light when things went dark." The table responded with raised glasses, a few tearful smiles, and one loud clink after another. Then Kim added, "And to those who wrote letters, even when they weren't sure they'd be read." Everyone laughed softly. Evelyn dabbed her eyes. Tommy gave a gruff nod. Keanu squeezed Kim's hand. That night, as the last guest left and the quiet returned, Kim looked out the window at the garden she had crossed that morning. "You know what I'm going to do tomorrow?" she asked. Keanu looked over, curious. "I'm going to walk to the tree we planted, and I'm going to sit under it. Just sit. Because I can." He smiled, leaning back into the couch. "I'll bring the coffee." The next morning, as dawn broke and dew clung to the grass, Kim took those steps. Slowly, carefully, but on her own. She sat beneath the tree they'd planted together, sunlight breaking through the branches. Keanu joined her moments later, 2 mugs in hand. No words were needed. They had already said everything. The lights in the studio were warm, golden, and just slightly dimmed, like a sunset trying to hold onto the horizon a few minutes longer. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in the interview chair, his posture relaxed, but his eyes thoughtful, distant. Across from him, the host, a veteran journalist named Elaine Sharp, shuffled her note cards nervously. This wasn't just another celebrity appearance. It was something deeper. Elaine leaned forward, softening her voice for the next question. "Keanu, there was a period in your life when you disappeared from Hollywood. From everything, really. But the world only learned why later. Why didn't you quit acting, even when everything seemed lost?" Keanu didn't respond immediately. He glanced at the audience, then to the camera, and then back to Elaine. For a moment, it felt like he was seeing something far away, something only he could see. "I did," he said simply. "I quit everything, except love." The audience fell silent, No coughing, no whispering, just a stillness that held its breath. Elaine blinked, visibly moved. "That's powerful. What do you mean by that?" Keanu folded his hands together on his lap. "When my sister got sick, it didn't matter who I was on a movie screen. None of that felt real anymore. The only thing that did was showing up for her, being present. No scripts, no cameras, just holding her hand, making sure she didn't face it alone." Elaine placed her note cards down slowly, sensing that the conversation had gone somewhere deeper than she expected. "You once said in a previous letter that love isn't medicine, it's stronger. Do you still believe that?" Keanu's eyes softened. "More than ever. Medicine helped Kim survive, but love gave her the reason to try. Love reminded her that she wasn't just fighting to live, but fighting to be with someone. That changes everything." The camera panned slightly across the crowd. Grown men in tailored suits blinked back tears. A young woman in the front row gripped her husband's hand. Even Elaine, composed as ever, dabbed at her eye before continuing. "She's in remission now," Elaine said gently. "How's she doing?" Keanu smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "She's great. She bakes too much, she texts me embarrassing things during interviews, she still carries that same laugh that used to echo in our childhood hallway, and every time I hear it, I feel like we made it back from somewhere impossible." Elaine nodded slowly, letting the moment settle. "What do you want people to take from your story?" Keanu took a deep breath and then leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with the camera lens. "That presence is everything. You can't always fix what's broken. You can't always win. But you can show up. You can stay. You can sit in the silence, hold someone's hand through the pain and say, 'I'm not going anywhere.'" He let the pause linger before continuing. "I know not everyone gets the ending we did, but the fight itself, the choice to love through the hardest moments, that's the victory." The audience erupted into applause, not the typical talk show kind, but something slower, more reverent, like a room full of people collectively saying thank you. Elaine placed her hand over her heart. "I think we all needed that reminder." The show wrapped not long after, but the moment had already escaped the stage. Within hours of the broadcast airing, clips of the interview spread across social media. The segment titled "Keanu, I Quit Everything Except Love" trended globally. People weren't just reposting it, they were sharing their own stories in the comments. Stories of cancer, of siblings, of presence, of grief and grace. One comment read, "I watched my sister fade away and I always wondered if I did enough. After hearing Keanu, I think maybe just being there mattered more than I realized." Another, "This isn't just an incredible story, it's a mirror. It's what we all need to remember." News outlets picked up the story again. Talk shows quoted his words. A university professor added the clip to her ethics and empathy lecture. A nurse's station in a leukemia ward replayed the interview on a loop in their break room. And through it all, Keanu remained humble, quiet, and almost embarrassed by the attention. "It's not about me," he told a friend over coffee. "It's about everyone who's ever sat by a bed and refused to walk away." Later that month, Kim appeared on a podcast with a small, independent journalist. She spoke about her brother in glowing terms, but it wasn't about the fame or the movies or even the interview. "Made the world stop," she said, "so I wouldn't have to face it alone. When I couldn't move, he became my legs. When I couldn't breathe, he filled the room with life." That's what love is. Not the grand gestures, just never leaving. The interviewer asked if she ever re-watched the segment from the talk show. "Once a year," Kim smiled. "On the anniversary of my remission, I watch it and I cry. Not because it's sad, but because it reminds me that my brother saved me without lifting a scalpel. He did it by staying." By the time the year ended, the interview clip had been viewed over 48 million times. It was translated into 10 languages, shared by nonprofit organizations, used in hospitals, classrooms, and even therapy groups. But Keanu never took a dime from it. He released a statement through his publicist: "If this story helps someone stay by a hospital bed instead of walking away, then it's done more than any film I've ever made." It was more than an interview. It was a lesson. A moment when the world stopped and listened, not because a movie star had spoken, but because a brother had stayed. And somehow, that made all the difference. The sun filtered softly through the windows of Keanu's Los Angeles home. It was his birthday, but the house was quiet, deliberately so. No fanfare, no red carpets, no champagne. Just the creak of the hardwood floor under his bare feet as he walked to the kitchen to make his usual morning coffee. Black, no sugar, just how he liked it. On the counter was a small, hand-dressed envelope, cream-colored and tied with a gold ribbon. The handwriting was unmistakable. Kim's. He blinked, surprised. She had already called that morning, had already sent him a gift, a vinyl record of their favorite 80s band. But this envelope hadn't been mentioned. It sat there like a whisper, waiting to be heard. He untied the ribbon carefully, unfolded the letter, and began to read. "Dear Keanu, happy birthday. I could have written a text, sent you another goofy mug with your face on it, or told you I love you like I always do. But this year felt different. This year, I wanted to remind you of something you might have forgotten. They said I had weeks, you gave me years. When the doctors looked at me with those tired eyes, offering condolences in sterile words, I could see them giving up. I could feel time slipping like sand through fingers. But then you grabbed my hand, and you didn't let go. You gave up the world for me. I remember waking up in the hospital, so weak I could barely lift a spoon. But there you were, reading some strange philosophy book aloud at 2 a.m., your voice cracking on every third line, trying so hard not to sound worried. You called it bedside poetry. I called it love. You didn't just sit next to me, you stayed next to me. I remember the silence too, the nights when I couldn't speak because the pain made everything inside me tremble. You said nothing, but your hand never moved. Not once. You didn't ask for cameras. You traded scripts for IVs, red carpets for hospital tiles, premieres for emergency alarms. You paused your life so I could fight for mine. Most people don't know that part of you. They know the actor, the icon, the enigma. But I know the brother who once slept on an ER couch just to be the first face I saw after a rough procedure. I know the man who would bring sunflowers because I hated roses, who'd drag in old boom boxes so I could listen to Fleetwood Mac while my blood counts dropped, who wrote me a different letter every day. I couldn't lift my head to see the sun. I know the man who didn't flinch when I started to disappear. When my hair fell, when my weight dropped, when the mirror became my enemy, you never once looked away. You stayed. You saved me. No, not just with money, or medicine or famous connections. You saved me with presence. With your stubborn, unyielding, infuriating, beautiful loyalty. And even when I wanted to give up, you didn't. I think the greatest role you ever played was never on screen. It was the one no one saw. The quiet part, the real part. The brother who never auditioned to be a hero, but became one anyway. And now, here we are. You're older, apparently wiser, and still the only person who makes me laugh so hard I snort tea out my nose. You once told me that love is stronger than medicine. You were right. You were my medicine, Keanu. You gave me birthdays I wasn't supposed to have. You gave me memories I never thought I'd make. You gave me mornings, movie nights, dance parties in the kitchen, bad cookies and worse coffee. And you gave it all without asking for a thank you. So here's mine, years late, but better now than never. Thank you for trading everything for me. Thank you for choosing me every single day. You told me once that every role has an ending, but not this one, because this role The role of brother, of guardian, of silent warrior never ends, it only deepens. I hope you never forget that. I hope this letter finds its way into that old leather journal you keep, the one you call the only role that mattered. Because to me, it did, and it always will. Happy birthday, big brother. With all my love. Keanu stared at the letter for a long time. His hand trembled slightly as he folded it back into its envelope. He didn't cry, not this time. But his breath caught in that way it does when the heart is too full for words. He walked into his study, the small room with high shelves, a typewriter in the corner, and a locked drawer he only opened once a year. Inside was a black leather-bound journal with fading gold lettering. The only role that mattered. He opened it. Inside were dozens of letters, some from him to Kim, some from Kim to him. A map of their journey, written not in timelines but in love. He placed the new letter in carefully, smoothing it out so it wouldn't crease. Then he closed the book, pressed it to his chest, and just stood there. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. The world was still spinning, but inside that room, time had stopped again, just for a moment, to honor the gift of years once thought impossible. Keanu didn't need a birthday party. He had something better. He had proof that love had rewritten the ending. The sound of the engine hummed low and steady beneath them. It was still dark out, the sky ink back with the earliest blush of morning peeking at the edges. Keanu sat behind the wheel of a borrowed vintage convertible. No tinted windows, no assistant following behind, no handlers. Beside him, Kim leaned back in the passenger seat with a light blanket over her lap. Her face was turned upward, eyes closed, breathing in the cool coastal air. The soft whoosh of the waves echoed nearby as they drove along a quiet stretch of Pacific Coast Highway. It was just past 5 a.m. They had planned this the night before, though it hadn't taken much planning. No itinerary, no destination, just a sunrise, one they had promised to watch together when Kim was too weak to lift her head from the hospital pillow. And now here they were. Keanu kept his hand on the wheel, the other resting gently near hers. They didn't speak for a long while. They didn't need to. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of the weight of survival, of presence, of having endured the unendurable together. The road curved slightly, revealing a break in the cliffs, and the faint orange glow of morning began to bleed through. Keanu pulled the car onto a lookout point. No other vehicles were in sight, just a sliver of sand, open sky, and endless water. He turned off the ignition. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled. Kim slowly stepped out of the car, holding onto the door for balance. Keanu was already at her side, offering his arm. She took it, and together they walked to the edge of the overlook where the ocean breathed beneath them. The sun crept higher, gentle and slow, as if it too knew the sacredness of this moment. They stood there, side by side, not saying a word. And then, softly, Kim whispered, "That's what we fought for." Keanu looked over at her. Her eyes were glossy, reflecting the burnished gold of morning light. There were faint creases on her face, new from the last 2 years, but they looked like strength, not age. He nodded, a faint smile tracing his lips. "That's what we'll never forget." The wind picked up slightly, rustling her hair. She tucked a loose strand behind her ear and leaned her head against his shoulder. "You know what I was most afraid of?" she asked. He turned toward her, brows slightly raised. "I wasn't afraid of dying," she said. "I was afraid of dying before I got one more day like this, before I got to just be with you again. No machines, no tubes, just this." Keanu swallowed hard. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny voice recorder, the same kind he used when recording those future birthday messages back when everything felt uncertain. He clicked it on and held it up. "You want to say something to future you?" he asked gently. Kim grinned and took the recorder. She paused, thinking. Then into the mic she spoke. "Dear future me, if you're listening to this, it means you're still breathing, which means you still have time. to dance badly in kitchens, to eat cookies before dinner, to tell people you love them now, not later. She stopped and handed it back. That's all I needed to say. He clicked it off and placed it gently back into his coat. They returned to the car, but didn't get in. Instead, they sat on the hood, legs stretched out, the blanket wrapped around both their shoulders. Kim reached into her bag and pulled out a thermos. Hot tea, courtesy of Evelyn. She said it's good for the soul. Keanu chuckled. She's not wrong. They sipped quietly, watching the waves crash rhythmically against the rocks below. It felt surreal, almost cinematic. But it wasn't a movie. It was earned. Every breath, every laugh, every heartbeat. A single pelican soared overhead, wings stretched wide, gliding effortlessly along the wind current. Kim broke the silence again. You know, I used to think that healing meant going back to who I was before the illness. Now I know it means becoming someone new. Because of it. Keanu looked at her, admiration plain on his face. You're more you now than ever, he said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small stone, smooth and heart-shaped. She placed it in his palm. I found this in your garden, she said. It reminded me of us, solid, worn by time, still beautiful. He turned it over in his hand, fingers closing around it. Thank you, he said quietly. As the sun fully crested the horizon, the world seemed to exhale. Everything looked sharper, more vivid. The blues of the ocean, the golds of the sky, even the greens of the cliffside. Kim leaned over and kissed Keanu's cheek. For every moment you chose me. Thank you, she said. He looked away briefly, blinking back the mist in his eyes. Best choice I ever made. Eventually they climbed back into the car. As Keanu started the engine, the radio flickered on with a soft melody. It was one of their childhood songs, a tune that played on cassette tapes during long road trips with their mom. Kim smiled. You planned that, didn't you? Keanu feigned innocence. Pure coincidence. She laughed. And as they drove back along the coast with the sun warming their backs and music filling the space between them, it was clear this wasn't just a drive. It was a chapter, a reminder, a sunrise not just for the day, but for the life they reclaimed together. The sun had fully risen now, painting the sky in soft gold and lavender as Keanu stood alone on the cliffside path overlooking the ocean. The vintage recorder in his hand clicked softly as he turned it on one last time. His voice, steady but thick with memory, flowed into the morning air like a whisper meant for everyone and no one at all. Doctors gave her weeks, he said quietly, but we didn't give up on time. There was a long pause, filled only by the cry of distant gulls and the rhythmic lap of waves below. I've lived a life filled with scripts, he continued. Pages that told me who to be, where to stand, what to say. But nothing in any movie, no role, no award, ever taught me what I learned watching my sister fight to live. His hand tightened around the recorder. She didn't just survive. She showed me what resilience really is, what family really means, and that when everything falls apart, presence is the most powerful thing you can give. Keanu walked slowly along the edge of the trail, boots crunching softly on gravel. The wind brushed through his hair, and behind him the first rays of morning glinted off the roof of the car where Kim waited, smiling, waving gently from the passenger seat. I didn't know what would happen, his voice continued. I didn't have a plan. All I knew was I couldn't let her feel alone. Not once. He stopped walking, looking out at the vast horizon, and let the recorder rest against his chest. This was an incredible story. But more than that, it's proof that love doesn't clock out. It doesn't ask for a break. It doesn't wait for conditions to be perfect. Love just stays. Another beat of silence. Sheen taught me that, just by holding on. Then, softer, almost like a vow to the universe, he added, you don't have to be a superhero to save someone. Sometimes, you just have to sit by their side and believe, for both of you. The recorder clicked off. Keanu tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket and turned back toward the car. As he walked, his steps were steady, purposeful, not like someone looking backward, but someone who knew exactly where he was going. This was a man who had traded spotlight for shadow, fame for faith, and speed for stillness. And somehow, in that quiet rebellion against the world's expectations, he'd found something greater. Love that endured, hope that healed, and a sister who reminded him that the greatest roles are the ones that don't need cameras to be real. As the screen faded to black, Keanu's voice echoed one last time, this time to the viewer directly. If you believe in the power of family, of sacrifice, and of staying beside someone even when the road looks impossible, then please share this incredible story. Because someone out there needs to know it's never too late to show up for the people you love. And tell us in the comments, what's the greatest thing you've ever done for love? Or what's the greatest thing someone's done for you? If you believe love is stronger than any diagnosis, subscribe for more stories like this one. Because sometimes the most incredible stories aren't fiction, they're just waiting to be told.